folks. Welcome from all around our beautiful state. Just want to thank you for joining us. We're here for a training webinar on accessing tribal climate and health resilience data in California. And I'm really honored to be here with you, and I get to work with many of you in California tribes pretty often. And I know that you are busier than ever right now. You're trying to line up plans and resources to safeguard your communities from the impacts of climate change, among a sea of other responsibilities that you've got. And I just want to appreciate you taking an hour and a half to spend with us and our guest speakers today. Hopefully what we share today will help you save some time on the back end, lighten the load a little in your adaptation and resilience work. And I'd like to encourage you all to introduce yourselves over chat in whatever way you're comfortable with, and maybe share with us while you're in the chat something, the most recent climate event that has created a health challenge for your community. I'll start. We've had some thunderstorms and power outages in my community somewhat recently. And so Shasta and I are going to introduce ourselves first. I'll start. I'm Angie Hacker. I'm the CEO and principal consultant of Prosper Sustainably. We're the lead consultant for Shasta for the Tribal Climate Health Project. And so I'll hand it off to Shasta.
Thanks, Angie, and good morning, everybody. Glad you're able to join us today, and glad that we have an opportunity to share some of what we've learned about climate and health data. And if you're like me, you may have discovered as you're developing climate adaptation plans or assessing your vulnerabilities that some of the data that we need to really inform those plans is harder to come by than we want it to be. So that's why we've developed some great relationships with folks at the state, and local levels. And we've invited some of the folks here today to share with us what their departments can do to give us access and help us get some of the data that we need to really have informed plans and to have good, strong partnerships with other people in the state who are doing similar work. So I'm honored to have them here today. I'm happy as always to be able to present together with Angie, whose work on the Tribal Climate Health Project has been absolutely indispensable. She does the hard work of making me look good. So thank you for that, Angie. And again, welcome. Please put your name and your affiliation in the chat so we know who's with us today, and be thinking about questions. You can put those in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. But now I'm going to turn it back to Angie, and she's going to start us off.
All right. Well, thanks, Shasta, and thanks as always for your leadership and the leadership of the Palabana Mission Indians, who oversees the Tribal Climate Health Project. So we'll just share a little bit about what we're up to today. So we've got you for an hour and a half, and we know, because we've been at this for 6 or 7 years, that understanding and addressing your tribe's most pressing climate and health vulnerabilities can require an overwhelming amount of legwork and technical know-how, and just a lot of time in many cases that I know many of you don't have. So today we're going to share the results of recent work that we conducted under a BIA grant that's aimed at making it easier for tribes to access data relevant to climate and health resilience and adaptation decisions. And we're also going to, we're welcoming here today some other guest speakers from state agencies that are working really hard to try to also provide some resources and offerings designed to support you and California tribes with climate and health adaptation resources. So here's our agenda for the day. Like I said, I'm going to go first and just share with you the results of that work that we have done that I hope is translatable to you. And then we're going to hear from 4 state agencies, and I get to introduce them all as we go. But we've got a WEHA, we've got the California Department of Public Health, the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and the Strategic Growth Council, all with some pretty great resources that they want to share with you to help you in your climate adaptation work. So my piece is here first, just to share with you what we've been up to. So like I said, we've been doing this work for about 7 years, providing capacity building support for tribes across the country, primarily with BIA funding. And we're really grateful for the work we've been able to do alongside our tribal partners. A lot of that work has been in trainings, and we've provided over almost 100 trainings at this point by now. Lots of information on our website. Hopefully you're familiar with our work and perhaps have participated in a training or two. Perhaps Shasta, if you have a second, you can drop our website in there just so people can familiarize yourself with us. But from the work of doing trainings, we realized pretty early on that training alone wasn't going to lift enough of the barriers off of tribes of trying to do this work of really understanding their most pressing vulnerabilities, the health and other threats related to climate change. And so we got really into the work of data development. And what that meant for us was to try to compile what we could of what data was available out there that was meaningful for tribes as they try to make decisions about where to apply their limited time and resources to adapting to climate change and safeguarding the health of their communities. And so that's what we're going to talk mostly about today. That work has mainly in the first couple of rounds focused on the Southern California area, but it was intended to be translatable. And so today we'll share with you how we've supported several tribes in Southern California and how all of this work has resulted in a tool that we have developed along with a protocol that can help you access data far more easily than if you're starting from scratch on your own. And then how that can, hopefully how that can help build capacity for folks around the state and even throughout the country. So if you've done this work, and maybe give me some kind of a thumbs up or some kind of an emoticon or something if you've done the work of trying to deal with the data involved in adaptation planning. All right, so you may have found that it's really important, right? It's an important piece, and there's a lot of information to consider when you're trying to decide what are my most critical threats, what vulnerabilities are happening that are very severe, frequent, likely, and maybe happening pretty soon. So it involves quite a bit of fact finding in it. There's so many potential impacts that can affect your community's well-being that the fact finding can become pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. And so if you've done the work, you probably know that understanding your vulnerability is usually the first step. So you might do a vulnerability assessment before you do an adaptation plan. And so the climate vulnerability assessment, the idea is to prepare to address the impacts of climate change on your tribe. And it's important to do that first, it's critical to understand the tribe's unique and most significant vulnerabilities. So before you can act, you really have to understand the problem. And that's what a vulnerability assessment helps you do, but there's a lot of information that goes into it. You have to understand your exposure, so that on the left where it goes, it's like an equation. There's an understanding of how much of an exposure risk is there. What's the precipitation change going to look like? How hot is it going to get? How long will the droughts last? And then impact risk. And so that, what assets are important to your community and which ones are really being threatened and to what level? So, are you experiencing heat-related illness? Are you experiencing changes to asthma rates? Are you experiencing changes to vector-borne disease rates? And then population sensitivity, meaning, are there characteristics in your community that make you more vulnerable to the climate events that are coming your way? And then, subtract from that risk level adaptive capacity, meaning, has your community done some things that have already helped you build strength and resilience to adapt to the climate changes that are occurring? So these are all the kinds of information that go into determining vulnerability. And there's a lot of steps. So under the steps there you see on the green, a lot of the time in that process goes into identifying what indicators am I looking for? What am I measuring? What information do I even need to look for? And then where is it? So gathering that information and then analyzing that information. And then at some point you'd prioritize and use it to make decisions about your biggest vulnerabilities. And so, there's a lot of places to go looking for that information. We like to recommend a braided approach, which I think a lot of tribes are using. Meaning, maybe first you're looking at your internal information. What reports do you already have? What traditional knowledges can you apply? What local observations can you incorporate and gather? And then there's a lot of external information that can be useful. things like credible reports and studies that may be developed by agencies like the ones you're seeing here today, publicly accessible databases. That's a lot of what we'll end up talking about because we wanted to economize that process a little bit for you. There's a lot of them, and we wanted to at least help you navigate to the right ones, or the ones that we think are the most useful. All right, so that leads me to just wanting to mention our tool, and I'm going to show it to you quickly, but we actually have a guide that goes with it that can walk you through how to use it. And we're always available to provide support as well. So this is the tool. It's called the Exposures, Impacts, and Strategies Inventory Tool. It matches alongside the diagram on the left, which Tribal Climate Health Project put together. It's trying to just outline for everybody like the top exposures. So the main categories of exposures. So it's direct exposures like temperature extremes, wildfires, storms and flooding, drought, melting ice and sea level rise, and then the cascading effects of those climate exposures, including secondary exposures like worsened air quality or water insecurity. And then those impacts, and those impacts are categorized under natural environment, built environment, and health and social environment. And we have spent a lot of time on the health and social environment because that's one of the key focuses of our Tribal Climate Health Project. And we know that the tribes that we work with don't think of health in just a medical sense. And so under there, we have human health, we talk about mental health, we talk about cultural and spiritual health, and socioeconomic health. We know that health for our tribal communities is a holistic, and even things happening in the natural and built environment, they're all interconnected. And so the Exposures, Impacts, and Strategies Inventory, so the EASY tool, is really built to help tribes avoid blind spots related to climate impacts and help tribes find and invest in addressing their most severe and likely climate vulnerabilities. So it's a companion to our training, and it's trying to help lower the fact-finding burden. And it's filterable, customizable. It's in Excel, but it's what it sounds like. It's an inventory or a menu. It suggests and organizes menus of the kinds of data that I just talked about. So the exposure data, the secondary exposures, the impacts, the population sensitivity, adaptive capacity, and this thing that we do that's a little special, which is valued community assets, where we're basically saying if a community should protect the things it cares about the most, and that's an important factor in determining how you're going to act and what's most critical to address. And so why don't I just kind of quickly show this to you so that you see it. The first thing I want to do is show you where it is on our website. So if you go to tribalclimatehealth.org, it's under training materials, and this whole website's getting revamped. But for now, you can find it under tools and templates, and it's a quick free download. You click this, and then you have access to the Excel document, and along with the guide. So this is a basic Word doc, a PDF document that helps you understand how to use the tool. And the tool itself looks like this. Drag this over. Oops. Went to my wrong screen. Oh, here we go. Okay. All right, so it looks like this. And there's a few tabs, and the one I really want to point out to you today is the exposures tab. Okay. So it walks you through those steps of looking at your vulnerabilities. And the first one is an exposures tab. And look, it's not an uncomplicated Excel tool, but what it is it's organized by the exposures that your community may be experiencing. So say temperature extremes are something that you're really concerned about. It will give you a lot of different exposure indicators that you might look at. So let's start at the top. If we just look at temperature extremes, or say, yes, we'll look at temperature extremes. A lot of different kind of indicators or metrics you can look at. So you might look at minimum temperature, maximum temperature, You might look at extreme cold days. And so what we've done here is list the kinds of indicators you might want to find data for, and also where you can go to find the data. So if you're anywhere in this country, you could go to the ones that we've linked here. It's providing historical, baseline, and projected data. If you're in California, we actually have really great tools here. So we pointed you to some specific tools that are available to California tribes. And so you would click and then you would use it. We try to point as directly as we can to the indicator that we are talking about on this particular line. And what this worksheet does is allow you to drop data in. So if you found some good historical data, baseline data, or future, right, projections, you can drop those here and that will help you understand what trends are beginning to look like. At the end of the day here, you would then be able to provide a exposure risk level for this particular exposure. And then the impacts tab looks very similar, although it's talking about impacts. And so for each exposure, we have gone through the research to try to decipher what impacts there are to tribes. So for example, if we're talking about wildfire, we might see that public services and infrastructure are damaged or disrupted, right? So how do we know? Well, we can look at some indicators. How many incidents of road closures or transportation disruptions have there been? What are the number of power outage incidents and impacted customers? And so where we have access to a data source that's publicly accessible, we've linked to it. And that's how it works. So again, it's built to be editable. You can edit any of this. You can add indicators, you can add data sources, and you can add your own findings, and then you can add your own prioritization. So in this case, you would look across a lot of different information and decide, okay, well, I think wildfire, this particular impact of wildfire is actually a really high risk. So it's one way to do it. It's not the only way to do it. If you can take any value out of this, we would welcome you to do it. There's also here another, you can factor in population sensitivity and adaptive capacity data. And then at the end of the day, once you know your vulnerabilities, we would also welcome you to look through our adaptation strategies to see whether any of those would apply to you. And so there's a lot more materials that we have. There's actually more trainings that we've done to go into detail on how to use this tool. But I wanted to give you more of a teaser here today because we're available to support you if you would like to start using the tool. So that's what it looks like. And I mentioned there's a guide. So there's a guide that's called Accessing Tribal Climate and Health Resilience Data. And it takes you step by step, both in how to use our tool, but also how to use a data request for the California Tribal Epidemiology Center. So maybe if you're here, give me a little thumbs up or some kind of emoticon if you've ever worked with your California Tribal Epidemiology Center. I know a lot. Yay, Shasta's giving thumbs. We love them. They've been a really great partner of ours. So this is the second time we've updated this tool, this protocol with them. Basically, what it means is there is now a standardized way to go to CTEC and ask them for a data request. And so they have a lot of really good tribally focused, tribal and health focused data that you can access, but you have to make a request. And it's not a hard process, especially now, because we've set up a whole a backend spreadsheet that they have access to. So all you really need to do is submit referring to our protocol, and you're going to get a whole host of data. Let me tell you the kind of data that you can look forward to receiving from CTEC. So all these kinds of things that are indicators of health impacts and potential exposures. And so things like, and really it's beautiful the way they've done this, because they've categorized it in some ways: a healthy mind, a healthy body, and a healthy community. And so things like depression diagnosis or overall mental health status, you can learn that for AN communities at a county level, and you can see trend data over 5 years. So pretty good. And it's not something you have to go digging up yourself. They present it for you in a spreadsheet, and they also build some tables, so some visualization out of it for you. The healthy body, one of the new things we were able to access this year that we weren't able to access the last year is valley fever cases. So I know valley fever is an issue for a lot of the tribes that I've worked with in Southern California. Now you'll have access to understanding what the caseload looks like in your community. Oops. And then finally, some really good indicators here, some good data under healthy communities. So power outage incidents, food insecurity, homes with adequate water and sewer systems, PM 2.5 density and exposure, and population living in a rural area. So some new stuff. You'll see in the easy tool how this kind of gets woven together to help you make decisions, because right, isn't it a lot? So easy tools aren't doing everything for you, that's for sure. But all that work of scrambling to figure out what do I need to know and where is it, we've tried to eliminate some of that for you. And then in doing that work, part of this BIA-funded project has really been about, well, where are the gaps? How good is the data? And what's not there? What's not available to tribes that tribes really need to be able to identify and really visualize what their futures are looking like and what they should do to act now. And so some of the things we found out about the data is true for tribes. Sometimes it's true for other communities too, but the level of interpretation and analysis needed is often still too high. So some tools are really good and they come with really cool charts and graphs and maps, not all of them. So accessing it, we call that community ready, when it's like somebody in your position, maybe in an environmental department, can easily go to a tool, easily drag out some information, plop it into a report, present it to decision makers, and make some decisions based on it. And then some parameters, it's just, there's some gaps in the data. Sometimes you don't get data as far back as you want. Sometimes the data, you don't get any projections. Usually for health data, there's almost no projections available. So you don't know how things are expected to change in the future related to climate change. Oftentimes it's not location specific enough. So tribes often want it to be on their lands, or at least their ancestral lands. And so you can get down to county level sometimes, but further down would be more useful, obviously, because there's a lot of conditions and characteristics about tribal communities that a county level data set is just not meaningful in some cases. And sometimes these the data is not connected to a climate event. So you might be able to get PM 2.5 data downscaled pretty down to maybe like a census tract, but it's not telling you that it's associated with the climate event. So PM 2.5 might be a good indicator of like wildfire, air quality issues, but if it's just an annualized data and not episodic to a wildfire, it's really hard to ascertain the climate risk. And then finally, we hear this from tribes a lot. They want to see more models and data sources using and incorporating traditional ecological knowledge and indigenous science, and they just don't. And so it's a real problem, but I know a lot of the agencies here and even at the federal level are trying to figure out how to do this in a sensitive and respectful way. So, in our future, we're looking at, we've been in working with the 12 tribes or so that we've worked with so far in Southern California and testing this all out. A lot of the gaps that we're continuing to see, we're going to start trying to pick off in our future grant cycles, things like water insecurity. What are the groundwater and basin level data? What's the well water and stream flow levels? It's really hard to access that data for tribes in a way that's close enough by and useful with projections. And then impact indicators, things like what kind of illnesses are coming along with wildfire, especially when it comes to smoke. Well, we like to look, we like better indicators when it comes to mental health. And then a really challenging area for tribes they consider cultural and spiritual health. And a really important part of health is the decline and disruption of culturally important species. That's oftentimes super hard, difficult. It's just complex. There's a lot of species within a particular community, and understanding the climate risk and the climate vulnerability of those species takes a lot of digging, and you could get lost there for years. So that's kind of the main overview. I wanted to share just kind of what we're working on, and there's future phases of this grant that we're working on now. We're going to try to tackle more of the problems that we're seeing. And in some cases, we're doing that in cooperation and partnership with the agencies that we think can support and help. And so I want to thank those agencies that are here with us today that have continued to be really good partners for us. One thing I wanted to share with the folks here is that we're recruiting for our next phase of this work. So we would like to find a handful of California tribes for the next phase of the data development project. That basically means that that easy tool that you saw, me and my team are going to go out and gather all the data for you. Everything that we know of that's publicly accessible, that we think is valuable for you to make decisions, we go get. You don't have to do it. We present it to you and we would ask for your feedback on it. Is this useful? What else do you need? What's confusing? And we would also ask you about just your own practices. What are your tribal best practices in managing this data, using it, and looking and using it over the long run? So it's a pretty small time commitment and a pretty good bang for the buck, I think, to get some free support that you don't even have to write a contract for. So sign up for that. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. We would love to have folks from different parts of California participate because we really want to test ground truth this tool and continue to improve it. The other thing I want to mention is we have our 2023 Tribal Climate and Health Summit coming up, and there's a registration for that as well. I'll drop the link in the chat and you just register to hold your spot. It's happening in November. It's right here in November, and it's going to be at Paula. And finally, stay tuned because we have a questionnaire that we'll be sending out. We want to hear more from all tribes in California about the data challenges and gaps and other adaptation challenges that you're having. So more to come. And anyways, that's what I wanted to share. And I wanted to stop for any questions that might have popped up for me in the chat.
So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, although I did put both the link to the training materials page on our website and the easy tool file that you can just click on that and download if you don't want to go to the website. And we can probably follow up with some of those tools and these links when we do a wrap up of this event, and we'll send along the link of the recording as well to everybody who registered. But I just want to reiterate, if you're not listening, we just made the offer to work with a couple of tribes for free to help you gather this data for your climate planning. So go to that link that Angie's going to put in the chat and nominate yourself for working with us and helping you get that data that you need. But I think at this point, just moving right along, just keep thinking about questions. We have a pretty tight agenda. We want you to get a lot of information, but if you think of something, just put it in the chat. And we're going to go ahead and move along to our next presenter. So Angie, I'm going to let you introduce them.
All right, so the first of 4 state agencies that we have here today to talk to you is WEHA, the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. I wanted to welcome Laura and Walker to present with you today. They are both working on a tool, a wildfire vulnerability tool that they want to share with you. So take it away, you guys. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Angie and Shasta. Really want to express my gratitude for being able to speak today. Hey, everybody, Walker Wieland, research scientist with OEHA. My colleague Laura August is also on the line, and oh, there she is. Hey, Laura. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides, and we'll take it away. Wanted to mention before I get started that NJ, I really appreciated the slides you had on sort of defining vulnerability and like where vulnerability falls in this process. I think that really ties in well with what we're trying to do here for this tool at OEHA in its characterizing vulnerability to wildfires at a community scale. So that was really nice. Just to add a background of our office, we're one of the 6 entities under the California EPA. One unique thing about the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA, is that we're non-regulatory based. So what we're really focused on at OEHA is the science at Cal EPA and providing scientific recommendations to other boards and departments, other state agencies, and other entities to really help them make the best decisions. So we do vulnerability assessments. That's a big part of what we do with Cal EnviroScreen, which is that a project Laura and I are also very deeply involved with. But a number of other projects and programs, as you can see on the slide example here. But increasingly, especially over the past decade or so, we've been really placing this lens of evaluating environmental health inequities on all of the programs and what we do at OEHA. So there are some examples of it here, but it's this basic idea that we want to identify the most vulnerable Californians to a range of exposures, whether it be to environmental pollutants and CalEnviroscreen, contaminated fish with fish advisories, or something like this tool, the wildfire tool, which I'll talk about. Just a touch of background. This is not a CalEnviroscreen presentation, but I think it's helpful to kind of frame CalEnviroscreen a bit in terms of where this wildfire tool came from. So this CalEnviroscreen tool is really focused on pollution, but also vulnerability, people's vulnerability to pollution. And it's made up of a large number of indicators that inform the statewide screening tool. And then there's a disadvantaged community designation associated with CalEnviroscreen that ultimately leads to funding mechanisms through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And one of the things that are really a core tenet of what we focus on in CalEnviroscreen is something that we call this public feedback loop. And it's super important to improve upon the work that we do, whether it's in CalEnviroscreen or other types of projects. And you can see this is basically a conceptual model of it here. So when we release a version of the tool, we always release it as a draft because we're always trying to get feedback from Californians to get an understanding of what their lived experiences are and how well or how poorly we're representing those and what we can do to improve upon our tool. We take workshop comments, written comments, meeting notes and feedback and other kinds of feedback that helps inform the future research that we do. And then we reanalyze our data, incorporating in that feedback as best we can to release another version of the tool. So one of the things that we really heard over the past two versions of CalEnviroscreen is that some parts of California and some communities really weren't represented particularly well in the tool. They may not face the same kind of pollution concerns or have the same kind of socioeconomic or health vulnerabilities that other Californians in other parts of the state. We heard this from rural communities and tribal communities in particular. And one of the things that we got in terms of feedback was about understanding wildfires, the impacts of wildfires, and people's vulnerability to wildfires. So climate-based indicators really aren't a part of CalEnviroscreen, but over the past 5 years, we've been working on this wildfire vulnerability tool to help address some of those concerns that we've gotten. The development of this tool has also been called out in the climate adaptation strategy published in 2022. And we formed a work group to try to get an understanding of what kinds of data are out there. Angie, I really like that EC tool. I think it's a really nice consolidation of important data sets around exposures and vulnerabilities. So I'll definitely be checking that out. And we worked together and eventually landed on this approach to characterize people's wildfire vulnerability based off of adaptive capacity, but then also wildfire risk data. And so this is our conceptual model of the different data sets that inform our community wildfire vulnerability tool here at OEHA. It's mapped out statewide at the census block group scale. And it's got these kind of like two pieces of a pie, right? So the right-hand side is wildfire hazard. And this data is pretty robustly collected and maintained in California. What's the likelihood of a fire occurring somewhere? What's the expected intensity of that wildfire? But what we're really bringing to the table with this tool that sets it apart from most of those other tools in the state is understanding the vulnerability of people to wildfire. So what's people's mobility or housing situation? What's people's socioeconomic or language situation? All of these 9 indicators in the tool give us an understanding, and especially at a cumulative nature, give us an understanding of where to prioritize and where to look for the most vulnerable Californians to be able, who are those most vulnerable to be able to prepare for, respond to, or recover from the effects of wildfire. I think this map does a good example where we overlay CAL FIRE's fire hazard severity zones with some of our wildfire risk data. And it really shows on some places that we're prioritizing. The census block groups are the black boundaries on this map. This is kind of on the east side of the valley, near the foothills outside of Stockton and Lodi. And it's this idea that we're looking for areas that are high in wildfire risk and also high with CAL FIRE's fire hazard severity zones to prioritize some of those zones and those communities. And so we take these measures of adaptive capacity and multiply them with these measures of hazard, really similar to Angie's equation, to understand what people's vulnerabilities are more cumulatively when you combine those two measures. And this is what the map looks like statewide. These are our draft results from our work. We've organized the results into percentiles. So it gives us a relative way to compare areas to one another, really similarly to what we do in Cal EnviroScreen. So those maroon and orange areas that you see here on this map are showing up as more vulnerable to the effects of wildfire than other areas. And we have an interactive map that I'll give a super quick demo on as well. So we know that once we've done this analysis, it's really a screening analysis, and really to take this work further and to understand the data more deeply, it has to do with combining it with other pieces of information, whether that be localized data or data on race, ethnicity. And this example, this couple of tables here is showing that when we stratify the wildfire vulnerability tool by race or ethnicity, we see Native Americans across California really being disproportionately impacted in regards to wildfire vulnerability. So an example of how you can take other pieces of information and really paint a picture of understanding, okay, we know where the most vulnerable communities are, but what's the makeup of those communities? The bottom table is another way of kind of painting the same picture when we look at tribal lands across the state, and we find that over half of tribal lands are in the most wildfire vulnerable communities. So a couple of different tables that kind of paint the same picture, showing that Native Americans are disproportionately vulnerable relative to other groups. So we think this tool is really a resource that's can be applied at a screening level, but then really broadly applied, whether it's to governments, to tribes, to other communities, and in research settings. This map example here shows kind of a situational awareness. So how you would understand wildfire vulnerability in regards to maybe an active wildfire that's occurring. This example from Quincy, the yellow dashed line here represents a fire perimeter boundary, and then the dark red census block groups represent vulnerable communities to wildfire, overlaid with sensitive receptors such as hospitals and schools. Another example that I was thinking of a little bit earlier in the presentation, where this was also applied, and when we were looking at it, was a couple of years ago with PG&E's public safety power shutoffs, where wildfire threat was high, power was shut off in certain areas. Well, it's important to know, if you're shutting off power in certain areas, are there folks that might need more assistance in regards to power centers or outreach, check-ins, make sure people are okay. So there's another example of how the tool could be useful in that application. A quick map demo. I know we don't have a ton of time, but just want to give you a quick flavor of what this looks like. So it's an interactive mapping tool. It's got a search bar here. I'm going to type in Clear Lake. Clear Lake's one word, of course. Clear Lake, California. So it's zooming in there. I'll just pop out a tab to give you some context. You can see that the legend and the symbology is the same as to what we were showing in the previous map. But here you can actually click on places, shown here in the teal outline, and get a deeper understanding of the underlying data from the wildfire vulnerability tool. So we see that the wildfire hazard is 94, meaning it's higher wildfire hazard there than 94% of the rest of the state. while adaptive capacity is at 82. And then this bar chart gives you just a little, it allows you to dig a little bit deeper, understand, okay, poverty, mobile homes, and disability are some of the indicators that are really contributing to a lowered adaptive capacity in the community. So there's other things you can do, like overlay other data sets on top of this on this map. You know, this is a seminar about data. We'll also make this information available as a web service. So you could take this data and put it in your own map and overlay your own layers with it. Oops. So just my last slide is what's coming next. We're planning on releasing the very first draft of this tool. It's not out yet, but it will be soon this summer, really soon this summer. And then as soon as we release it, we're going to have a series of webinars and outreach events around this tool, just as we did with CalEnviroScreen, where we'll be traveling to locations throughout the state in these high wildfire vulnerability areas and say, hey, help us ground truth this. What kind of measurements are sticking with you or not? Are there data sets that could better represent wildfire risk or adaptive capacity? We want to hear them. How could this tool be used? What are some ways that this tool could actually be a useful resource for you? And how can we frame that at our state agency? And then after we get that, we'll factor as much of that into our tool as we can, and then release the finalized version 1.0, indicating that it's once again an iterative tool that we'll be improving on later on this year. So we'd love for anyone who's interested to please engage with us. We've got our program email right here, cwvt@oeha.ca.gov. Please reach out if you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to partner at an upcoming event. Maybe it would be useful for myself or my colleagues to come speak. If we could really help in any capacity, we'd really be interested in doing that. So I'll stop there and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Walker. That was fantastic. I want to invite anybody to actually raise your hand if you have a question. Some questions here in the chat are mainly about accessing information. So yes, you will get slides. And as Walker just said, the tool itself will be available in early summer. And that's when you can tinker around in it, right, Walker?
That's right. And apologies for blasting through those slides so fast. I know we have a packed agenda, but we are recording, and please do reach out and I'd be happy to chat with you in more detail.
And I think it's worthwhile for folks to go back over the slides after we share them, and maybe that will trigger some questions or comments or things that you might suggest that OEHA include in their tool. You know, I'm happy to see that there's certain vulnerabilities in there that I think people don't necessarily think of when they think of wildfire. I know for me, when I put on my Tribal Historic Preservation Officer hat, I'm thinking about the effects of wildfire on cultural sites, accessibility to sacred areas, or impacts to being able to gather particular types of plant materials, medicinal materials. You know, all those things are ultimately a part of health. They're a part of tribal community health and individual health. And so obviously there's another conversation to be had that has to do with how we're going to protect certain types of tribal knowledge, because you don't want to put that into a tool, but at the same time, you want to be able to plan that within your own communities to make sure that you are assessing the potential impacts to access or habitat and that kind of thing that's related to cultural values and cultural practices. That's another conversation entirely too. And we talked about data and managing tribal knowledge, data governance, data sovereignty. So I just say that because I want everybody listening to know that that's something on my mind, and that we take that very seriously when it comes to individual tribes and their traditional and cultural knowledge. So anybody else? Anybody want to raise their hand and then get called on?
Well, why don't I ask a quick question then? And I want to say, you know, Walker and his team, we're just really lucky in California to have them and to have these data experts that are trying really hard to make this, like I was mentioning, community ready. I was wondering two things, Walker, and maybe you mentioned it. Do you go down, like the CalEnviroScreen tool goes down to a tribal scale, like the actual federally recognized lands? Does this tool do that? I'm sorry if you mentioned it. And does it consider wildfire smoke?
Yeah, those are excellent questions. So in Cal Envirus Screen, the disadvantaged community designation does include tribes, but the mapped results are still at the census tract. So it's kind of a translation thing, like how do you represent that data at tribes? We'd certainly be interested in looking at that more. This tool does not include smoke in it, and that's a very important aspect. We were looking at earlier in our research, we were looking at how do you represent smoke exposure statewide at the community scale. Research has been really progressing around that, and we're tracking that. But this tool is more focused on likelihood of structures burning, people getting hurt or worse, wildfires coming into communities rather than where smoke travels, which of course is a much sort of different pattern in what we see.
I see we do have a hand now. Emily.
Alka, I was listening, and as a cultural burner, I was wondering if that data was included, or if tribes were open to even listing that data within your research to see who's burning and how that reduces wildfires in their area because of cultural burning.
Yeah, excellent question, Emily. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Cultural burns do reduce wildfire likelihood, as we know, in areas, and data on past fires, and as cultural burns data are submitted to Forest Service and other sorts of databases that track fire occurrence. CAL FIRE, I guess, would be another one. As those data are submitted in there, they are factored into the tool. So we know that if a wildfire or a cultural burn is occurring in an area, that of course changes the wildfire hazard level, right? The exposure potential of a wildfire. So as that data is submitted to CAL FIRE or U.S. Forest Service, it's factored into the tool.
That's great. That's a fabulous question, because we're doing some of that work in Paula, and I know there's a lot going on in all parts of the state on that. But it looks like we're right on time to transition over to our next presenters. So Angie, you want to introduce them?
Oh, sure.
And
yeah.
thank you, Walker.
Thank you.
Actually, Shasta, would you read this one comment that made its way into the chat while I get my screen up?
Yes, so Amanda O'Connell had said that plants and animal species areas need to be included. Tribes don't want to map our gathering places. However, it would be good if OEHA could compile any state or federal agency data that tribes might not have or know where to find. And Amanda, that's exactly right. That's why we're doing this. So thank you for that excellent comment.
All right. Well, Walker, thanks so much for that. We really appreciate you being here and all the work that you're doing and engagement with tribes, which I know is going to continue throughout the summer. Our next speaker is Osamu Komasaka, and he is another good friend of the Tribal Climate Health Project. He is with the California Department of Public Health. He is the Tribal Climate Change Policy and Program Specialist, and he's going to talk to us today primarily about heat data, but some of you may already be working with him already on all sorts of health and health adaptation work. So I'll let you take it away from here. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for the intro, Angie. Hi, folks. Great to see some familiar names like Tim and also some new names. I'm just going to share screen now. All right. How's that? Yeah, so like Angie said, I'm in the Department of Public Health with my colleague who's here today, Elizabeth Rhodes, and we are in the Climate Change and Local Assistance Unit, which is specifically to provide support to tribes and local health departments with planning for climate change and health equity. So we like to use this graphic to show the full spectrum of ways that climate change can harm human health. But you can see here, we've got extreme heat as one of those main hazards that you can be thinking about when you're planning for the future. So I'm just going to share a little bit of info about the human health impacts of heat, just for folks who are less familiar, and why it's important to plan for heat in your area. And then I'll do a quick overview of a couple of tools that tribes can use to visualize and access heat exposure data. These tools can help us anticipate what is likely to happen in the future, kind of giving extreme heat projections for your area of interest. So in early September last year, as many of us experienced, a long-lasting heat dome settled over the US West, and that heat fueled wildfires and stressed the power grid before a tropical storm moved in and into the region and kind of broke that warm spell. And during that time, more than 61 million people were under active extreme heat advisories, watches, and warnings, according to the National Weather Service on September 7th. We had all-time high temperatures into the mid 110s degrees recorded in various California cities, including Santa Rosa, Livermore, and San Jose. And both Merced and Sacramento reached 116 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the highest temperature since record keeping began in 1899 and 1877, respectively. So we do anticipate periods of warmer temperatures and heat waves, such as the one we experienced last year. We expect them to increase in frequency, intensity, and duration throughout the 21st century. And there will be increases in annual average temperature specifically of up to 5 degrees Fahrenheit by 2030 and up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit in California by the end of the century or even sooner. And that is alarming because sustained high heat waves directly affect human health through heat-related illness such as heat stroke, heat exhaustion, and dehydration. Heat waves are also associated with increased hospital admissions for cardiovascular, kidney disease, including kidney stones, mental health, diabetes, and respiratory disorders. So in addition to death by heat stroke, the stress of being hot for multiple days and nights can actually increase your odds of dying from a heart attack or other heart conditions or respiratory diseases such as pneumonia. And because death certificates don't always attribute these other illnesses and premature deaths with heat, this can actually lead to underreporting of how deadly heat waves actually are. And it's important to keep in mind when you're doing your tribal planning that the vulnerable subgroups with the greatest risk of health impacts from extreme heat or with greater difficulty preparing for extreme heat events and reduced access to care might include older adults, children, those who work outside, those with lower socioeconomic status, those who are socially or geographically isolated, and those who lack adaptive capacity, as we call it, or things like air conditioning. And just as a basic overview, tribal governments and even individuals can change the built and natural environments to keep people cool, including in and around your homes and tribal government buildings. We like to break it into two chunks. So there's this key idea of managing any heat that you cannot mitigate. So mitigation is these longer term, more structural changes to the built environment that you can do through land use planning, through the design of your buildings and parking lots and streets, through increasing tree canopy and vegetation, and waste heat reduction. And then management is those things that are kind of more short term. So emergency preparedness and response, helping make sure that people have access to reliable energy and cooling systems, other kinds of public health interventions, and really just these ways to reduce exposure, especially of those heat sensitive populations that I was listing. So now I just wanted to get into this main data tool I want to highlight for you today, which is the Extreme Heat Edition of the California Healthy Places Index, which is a platform developed by the Public Health Alliance of Southern California and UCLA with input from our team. And I'll just have, Elizabeth, would you mind dropping the link to that in the chat? The extreme heat edition of the Healthy Places Index provides data sets on projected heat exposure for the whole state of California, as well as place-based indicators that measure community conditions and sensitive populations. So this is a tool that I'm learning how to use, and I'd welcome you to explore it as well. You'll see that it also identifies resources for reducing the impacts of extreme heat. And there's actually a category specifically for tribal governments. So how can you think about this tool? This tool can help tribes and individuals decide to prioritize investments in heat mitigation and heat management. It can help you kind of understand your heat exposure relative to the rest of the state. It can help you create maps really quickly of projected heat exposure for your tribal plans, so your adaptation or hazard mitigation plans. And then you can also download data for further analysis. The kinds of data that it offers, so it has these different categories of extreme heat measures, all the way down to the census tract level. So, Angie was talking about how things aren't always useful if it's just at the county level. You can actually get that really granular data, all sourced from California's 4th climate assessment, or CalAdapt, as we call it, data created for that. These projections kind of assume a business as usual emissions scenario. So, if emissions continue as they currently are, and you can look at different decades and what's expected in terms of the number of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit for your area, days above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and extreme heat days above the historic baseline. It also offers this whole suite of other data options. So you can look at your Healthy Places Index score, which would be a whole nother presentation to talk about. But I hope folks are familiar with that. There's various community measures that they've put in from the census. There's different population health indicators, mostly for conditions that make people vulnerable to extreme heat. And then there's these various environmental and housing quality measures for your area. So you can start to think about the various characteristics of your community, which could be a consideration while you're planning for heat. And I just wanted to highlight too, they have these different racial and ethnic compositions of census tracts, including AIAN alone or in any combination, which you can add as a layer. Here's another view of a tool. There's a couple different tools you can use on the platform that I'd encourage you to play around with. I showed a view of one indicator earlier. So you can just show one measure by using the filter by indicator tool and exploring your area of interest. So there's a little search bar at the top where you can type in your location that you're interested in, and then see, by census tract, zip code, county, et cetera, these different indicators. However, if you want to show your tribal boundary area, unlike the main HBI 3.0 tool, you would actually have to upload the GIS layer that you have of your tribal boundary area to the platform in order to kind of visually show that over the top of these different data. There are a lot of other tools. So right now you can see a view of the Visualize Multiple Vulnerability Indicators tool, which I think is quite useful. It allows you to select your extreme heat indicator, so 90 degrees or 100-degree days in the future, and then add on other indicators like tree canopy is an interesting one. You can also add on various, race, ethnicity variables or other features that I've listed earlier. There's also a rank by geography tool that allows you to, for example, kind of rank the different census tracts or zip code areas within your county to see how hot they are expected to be. So you can kind of see both within the state and within smaller areas of the state, how hot your tribal boundary area is expected to be, your tribal territories. Just a couple quick updates. The HPI team says the tool will be updated with extreme heat measures using the 5th climate assessment data once that is released. It may also be updated to include our CDPH syndromic surveillance data someday. So what that is we are bringing on a whole new team to do near real-time data reporting from California's 228 emergency department of climate-related emergency department visits. These data will be analyzed by CDPH and shared with local jurisdictions, but just please note that staff have not been hired yet for that program, and we haven't really worked out the other details yet of how that data distribution would work. And then just very briefly, there's a couple other options if you're like, well, that's not really the heat data tool that I was hoping for. There's also the California Heat Assessment Tool, which is more focused on these heat health events and the projected number of those in your area. So that's less about the kind of absolute temperature, so 90 degrees or 100 degrees, and more about the temperature in your area that's expected based on past events to create health impacts. So maybe a little bit more complex, but also more geographically specific and useful for folks who are like, well, 90 degrees, we see that all the time. That's not really a big deal for us. You can actually show, well, that, here's the threshold that actually creates health concerns in our area. And then the National Weather Service Heat Risk Tool, which is it provides a 7-day, for the 7-day forecast, potential heat risks with these clear color-coded categories that I've included down here. So if you're looking more at the short term and you're like, oh, I want to alert my tribe about upcoming heat waves and how concerning they are, that is the tool to go to. So just to close out, if you are super concerned about heat in your area or other kinds of climate impacts, there are a number of state grant programs with a climate and health focus that are all very eager to see more applications led by or joined by tribes. We've got several of those folks here today that are going to be presenting. And then if you want to workshop, potential ideas that you're having with us, we're going to have a combined state agency tribal climate and health funding fair later this month on June 27th. There's a registration link that we'll drop in the chat and you can come. We're going to do a quick lightning round of all these different funding opportunities that are upcoming, opportunities to receive technical assistance. And what we'll actually do is then give you an opportunity to meet with us in this session to workshop your ideas and your thoughts about what you're concerned about and what you'd like to receive funding for. So really encourage folks to register for that and come join us. And thank you. Please feel free to email me as well.
Thank you, Samu. And actually all the speakers, if you would mind. Yeah. Oh yeah. Thank you, Elizabeth. Just dropping your email address in the chat. That's super helpful for folks that just want to reach right out to you. There's some good information happening in the chat right now. So Elizabeth, who works with the SAMU at CDPH, is dropping all sorts of links. And there's been a good conversation here around the kinds of media and other resources that the state is able to provide to support heat. So make sure you're checking out the chat, and we will make sure all these resources coming back to you in a follow-up email. There's one question here. I wonder if we're running a little behind, but maybe a quick question for you, Asamu. Has the tool been designed to identify areas at risk by age, specifically older populations within affected zones?
Yes, actually, that is one of the layers that you can add on to the Extreme Heat Edition tool. So if you go to that select multiple indicators tool, you can first choose your heat level and what your period of time and temperature that you're concerned about in the future is, and then you can actually see in the future how many older folks are expected to be in that specific area relative to the other places. So I'm happy to give a demo to whoever that is. If that tool is confusing to you, it definitely took me a second to figure out what it's actually saying, but it is pretty easy to do just with the kind of selection feature. So you can select that, you could add tree canopy, you could add, different housing layers.
Well, thank you, Isamu. Really helpful stuff. And, you may already be feeling the dizzying feeling I felt in the very beginning of doing this work. Like, look at all these amazing tools, and there's a lot of them. I'm going to be incorporating everything we're learning here today that I don't already have in my Easy tool into the Easy tool, just so you kind of have an easy place to navigate from them. But that's why it was built, right? Because there's so many good things, but just remembering and knowing where to go find stuff is half the battle. All right, so we're going to keep moving on. We've got 2 more state speakers to get to, and next up is Patricia Kennedy and Ben McMahon. They are with us from the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and they're going to talk to us about climate services. So take it away. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Shasta, for inviting us. I do have to say Ben is unable to make it this morning. So I'm just going to plug his program for him and share his info out with you all. I'm going to share my screen here. Oh, I don't have permissions. I think I got disconnected and then
Let me make you co-host again. Stand by. Okay, you are now super powered.
All right. See if I can figure out how to use my powers. Yes, found it. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so I'll drop links and stuff into the chat after my presentation so I don't get too distracted. Are you able to see that main screen now? Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and I really kind of do an overview of the programs that we have, both that can help support you and your tribe in like capacity building or research projects, but then also a little bit on the data side and the tool development side. I work with the state and I already feel, like Angie just said, a little overwhelmed, right? There's so many tools out there, and how do we know how to navigate each one and which one's best for us? So those are a lot of the questions that we're going to be trying to answer, I think, through this presentation today. And love the work that Angie and Shasta are doing too. So thank you for bringing us all here. I'm learning a lot about even things that my my colleagues with the state are doing. So I work in the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. I work for the program called ICARP, or the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resilience Program. So it's really like our climate and research hub, right? There's our CEQA units, we have our climate units, we have our planning, like local planning, right? So we have a couple of different departments within, or like programs within OPR, and I really work in the climate science and research program. The first thing I really want to highlight is that support, right? We talked a lot about tools and resilience planning and adaptation planning. And I want to highlight 3 grant programs that can help support capacity and research projects, and some of them implementation projects. So starting with the Regional Resilience Grant Program. This is a new program. Final guidelines are going to be out for round 1 of funding, I think by the end of the month. So the application period hasn't started yet. And really what the purpose of this grant program is to support regional projects aligned with integrated climate adaptation and resilience planning. They're looking to prioritize projects that reduce climate risks from wildfire, sea level rise, drought, flood, increasing temperatures, and this does include health. Sometimes we don't always call it out, but that is a component of this. And they're really looking at that regional structure. That doesn't mean that tribes have to coordinate or collaborate with local government. It could be a tribal regional collaborative or something to that effect. But really looking at climate impacts from a regional scale and how we're working together on that. The next one, the blue circle there, is the adaptation planning grant program. They've actually already done their first round of funding. They will soon be scoping for their second round of funding. So an opportunity there with upcoming funding. This program is explicitly and meaningfully prioritizing equitable outcomes. That is one of their priorities when they're looking at applications. They're looking for communities to equitably plan for and respond to multiple climate risks. This is really a planning program, right? So I know a lot of folks say we need that implementation. I think I've heard Shasta say that a few times. And we get that. This one, maybe it will grow to that in the future, but right now it really is focused on those communities that need that planning focus. The next one, which I think is incredibly related here, is our Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Grant Program. This is very new. Like, they are just scoping out what their guidelines are going to look like, what they need to include. So I feel like this is a really great time to begin discussions about what do tribes need from this grant program? What kind of support do you need? How do we form this grant program to support the work that you're doing as far as extreme heat and impacts from extreme heat? And I'll share each one of these programs has a program manager, but I act as a general tribal coordinator for OPR. So you can always reach out to me with interest on any particular one, and I can get you to the right program manager. You've heard a couple times today reference to the 4th and 5th climate change assessment. So my primary project is working on the 5th climate change assessment. The climate change assessment is going to produce downscaled climate projections and core climate research on climate change related impacts specific to California. I see a typo, that's why I paused, sorry. Forgive my typos. There's some key components to the climate assessment. Downscaled climate projections and modeling, you've heard that referenced a few times. I think Osamu mentioned that they would be updating their tools to include the new data that's coming out. So I believe we're anticipating end of summer to have a release of all of the 5th assessment, like raw data, right? That then needs to be, I don't know, the data folks out there need to do stuff with it and make it to a place that is super accessible. And I think I really liked what Angie said earlier, community ready, right? So we have to figure out how to get it from this huge data set that's raw to make it to where it's community ready. And I'm going to talk about some of the ways we're looking to do that kind of moving forward. Let's see, this data so it's climate data and scenarios. They are projecting the climate impacts in California, specific to California, and trying to get in a more refined scale. I believe they quoted a 2-meter scale, which is supposed to be really good. They are using the CMIP6 projections, and so it's both climate projections and modeling that they will be releasing. That I think is really exciting, and it's going to kind of, it's a whole, compared to what we had in the 4th assessment. So get ready if you have tools you're ready to implement this data with. It's supposed to be just like 10 times the scale of what it was before. So a lot of very refined community level data that's going to be released. So we're really excited about that. But like I said, how do we take this data and how do we get it community ready? And we'll talk about that in a second. Another component of the California climate assessment are these regional and topical reports. And I'll mention in a minute, we're going to be scoping how tribes want to participate in the climate assessment as far as those regional reports go. There's core climate research, and I'm going to share the RFP for that in the chat. The climate assessment team did a pretty good engagement, probably always could be better, right? But to identify core climate research gaps and topics to be prioritized within the assessment. And we're really excited, these 26 climate topics that were identified. We have an overarching theme of how do these impacts relate to tribal communities. And so that's something we're emphasizing through this core research. And then 3 topics that are specific to tribal communities. So I don't have them memorized, but one is related to food sovereignty. One is related to cultural resources, including species of importance, such as species needed to, basket weave or whatever, right? So not just like from an archaeological perspective, what are those tribal cultural resources, but cultural resources on a broader scale and impacts to those from climate change. And then the third is really focused on understanding cultural burns and those, how cultural burns and I think traditional management of land can help us combat climate change. The difference between that and prescribed burning. So really open to research proposals on all of those items. And I'm going to share that RFP, the request for proposals for that project in the chat after I'm done speaking, but that is currently open and available for applications. Am I going too long?
We'll need to
Oh my
wrap up in
gosh.
about 30 seconds.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I didn't get to a lot of things. Okay. Tribal research program, really important. But I'll get to that quick. Okay. 30 seconds. Gosh, I guess. Okay. Tribal research program is within the 5th assessment, and it's expanding from the 4th assessment to really focus on how we can make the assessment meaningful for tribes. Is this a whole California assessment just for tribal communities? Is it making data and tools more available? So these are the components of that. I don't think I have time to get into each one of them, but each of these have a separate funding source. And we have resources and support behind each one. So really hope that we can chat with you all about that and use these resources to connect all of these tools together with the work that you're doing. The climate services, this is really what I was supposed to focus on today. CalAdapt is that tool that brings all of the climate data from the 5th assessment into one place. My colleague, Ben McMahon, who's unable to be here today, is looking to work with tribes and figure out how do we make this tool something that's super meaningful and community ready for you. I'm using that now, Angie, that community ready. I really like it. And then there's a couple other tools I think that can also really be helpful. And he's your guy for working on those components. Everybody was talking about doing summer engagement. We are also doing summer engagement. So I really think any way that we can work together on summer engagement, that would be great. The 5th assessment in general is going out. We're having separate tribal sessions at each one of these, but we're also looking to connect tribes with broader 5th assessment author teams. So tribal expertise is integrated into each of the regions rather than just being a standalone report. There will be a standalone report, but really looking to bring tribes in all of the components of the 5th assessment. And again, all of these have support, and we have support for attending these in-person engagement this summer. I'm so sorry, Angie. I thought I was on track.
I think I just want to make sure we have enough time for Strategic Growth Council to speak.
Yes,
You know what I want to do? Can we, I'm going to leave things open for a little bit after so that we can do some informal kind of sharing afterwards for whoever can hang around. All right. Thank you so much, Patricia. This looks like the contacts for anybody who wants to reach out directly. Okay, please hang around. So we got about 10 more minutes of the official program. We're going to invite up our last speaker, and then we can hang around for a little bit of Q&A and just chat for a few minutes afterwards so it doesn't feel quite so abrupt. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share back my screen and welcome up our friends at the Strategic Growth Council. So there's a few people here from Strategic Growth Council. Our main presenter is Nancy, I don't think that's spelled right, Chung, Program Analyst, Community Assistance for Climate Equity Program. And I'll drive your slides, but why don't you take it from here? Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, everyone. And I actually think I'm going to start off really quickly with the Community Resilience Center slides. I'll go really quickly. So I'm Coral Abbott. I'm the Community Resilience Center's Program Manager at the Strategic Growth Council. I'll go over the program really quickly and then turn it over to Nancy, who has a really cool program to talk about. So next slide, please. So the Community Resilience Center's program is a new grant program that is providing funds for construction or retrofit of facilities that can serve as community resilience centers. These are places that can be used for communities to go to during climate emergencies like wildfires, extreme heat days, or floods, but also spaces that are used year-round to build resilience of communities to any kind of disaster. That is done through services and programs that are offered year-round that help to keep the center active, build social connections, protect public health, build economic opportunities, and provide information and education that help communities to prepare for and respond to climate and other emergencies. And the program requires these grants to include partnerships across sectors and engagement of community members in the grant itself. Next slide, please. So for sake of time, I'll breeze through this, but we have 3 different grant types to meet your level of readiness to apply. We have planning, implementation, and a new type that's called project development that will fund basic infrastructure and pre-development costs, so kind of a bridge between planning and implementation. We can share a grant type guide in the chat that has a little more information on all 3 of those so you can learn about these 3. And then importantly, we have a tribal funding target in round 1 to fund 5 or more projects to tribes where a tribe is the lead applicant. Next slide, please. So the program funds a few things. First, new construction or upgrades to facilities themselves, something we're calling campus amenities, which are things that support access or use of the center, like a shuttle van located on site, or you could fund a native foods garden. Pretty expansive what you could do with some of those. And then services and programs based out of the site that again build resilience. Eligibility is really broad for facilities and applicants, but then just remember that you have to include partnerships and then make sure that facilities are emergency ready. Those are all detailed in our guidelines and we can follow up and share more information there as well. Next slide, please. Great, so our pre-proposal for implementation grants is out and due next Friday. We also have a technical assistance request form for planning and project development grants that is also due next Friday. We really are encouraging folks to fill those out, even if you just have a preliminary idea for a project, it's placeholders. It'll get you into our kind of system and we can help potentially match you up with technical assistance. We're also holding office hours throughout July and August. Some of those that I've listed here are specific to tribal and rural communities. We'll share where you can register for those in the chat as well and follow up with information. And so with that, I will hand it over to Nancy.
Thanks, Coral. And hi, everyone. My name is Nancy Chang, and I'm a program analyst for the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team. So I'll be presenting on RCC and the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program. Next slide, please. So the RCC program is designed to help communities establish partnerships, funding pathways, plan and policy readiness, and a local network of TA providers to pursue funding and implement climate projects. RCC grants will provide funding for diverse multi-sectoral organizations to come together and form a collaborative partnership structure that identifies how the partners will make decisions and work with one another. Next slide, please. In round 1, SGC made 6 awards totaling over $8.55 million to collaboratives in the North State, Southern California, Northern San Joaquin Valley, and the Bay Area. Of those 6 awards, 3 were to tribal-led collaboratives. Next slide, please. And to highlight a few key dates, we'll be releasing the NOFA and application on July 6th. Application workshops will be held throughout mid-July with workshops for tribal communities on July 18th and July 26th. And SGC is offering application technical assistance for new and repeat applicants. Office hours will be hosted every Wednesday starting on July 12th and will be an opportunity to speak with technical assistance providers and our staff and workshop early ideas on your proposal and ask questions about the guidelines. We're also offering consultation calls to round 1 applicants and are prioritizing tribal, rural, and unincorporated communities. And these are an opportunity to talk one-on-one with TA providers to work through your round 1 application and improve alignment to the program for round 2. So if you're interested in these, please email the case team, and I will share an email and all the links at the end of this presentation. The next slide, please. And now I'll share more information about SGC's newest program, the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program. Next slide. So the Tribal Capacity Building Pilot Program is a new program that will provide funding and tailored technical assistance to California Native American tribes. The goal of the pilot program is to assist tribes in developing long-term capacity to secure funding and implement tribal-led climate solutions. This pilot program will provide direct grants of roughly $100,000 to $150,000 to tribes to build staff capacity and fill gaps to advance the tribe's climate-related work. In addition to funding tribes, the pilot program will offer flexible capacity building and technical assistance services that are responsive to each tribe's needs to advance their climate work. Next slide. And we plan to bring on a TA provider to work with the awarded tribes to provide capacity building and TA services that'll be flexible and responsive to each tribe's priorities and goals. As you can see in the graphic, the TA provider will help support peer learning among the participating tribes and will also offer a number of different services, including trainings and workshops, grant application and management assistance, planning and implementation support, partnership building, leadership and economic development, and more. Next slide. Funding is available on a competitive basis. So we haven't set the exact award amount, but of the potential $1 million allotted to this pilot program, $600,000 is available for grant awards to tribes, with the remainder of the funding for the TA provider. These amounts are subject to change based on feedback received during the public comment period that is currently open, and I'll go more into that in the next few slides. Next, please. This pilot program is exclusive to all California Native American tribes listed on the NAHC contact list, including federally recognized and non-federally recognized tribes. A non-federally recognized tribe is eligible to apply if they are registered as a nonprofit. Next. And we have 4 eligible cost categories: staff, travel, tools, subscriptions, and software, and indirect costs. A few things to note on these: tribes can use staff costs to support existing staff, hire new staff, or provide a stipend for volunteers, interns, or fellows. And indirect cost rates will follow the tribe's federally negotiated rate, or up to 30% if the tribe doesn't have a federally negotiated rate. And also related to this topic, I wanted to flag that payment will be done on a reimbursement basis. Next. So this proposed timeline provides a general timeframe for program milestones. The most up-to-date timeline is posted on our program webpage and will be updated with specific dates as they're announced. And I'll go more in depth on the 90-day public comment period in the next few slides. We released a request for information on May 22nd to seek input from tribes and tribal serving organizations to inform the development of the pilot program. So we've developed this RFI based on a series of interviews, listening sessions, and other engagements with tribes. The purpose of this is twofold. 1, to seek input on the draft grant guidelines, which outlines the goals, processes, and requirements for tribes who apply to participate in the program. And 2, to seek input to develop a scope of work and proposal requirements for a solicitation for TA providers to support grantees of the pilot program. And next. And this is our second to last slide. So the RFI is open right now for a 90-day public comment period ending on August 22nd. We are currently hosting workshops this month to gather feedback on the pilot program, with the next one being next Tuesday, June 13th. The last 2 workshops being held on June 21st and June 30 are for tribes only, and you can register through the links on the slide. I'll also be sharing them at the end. So we are also respectfully requesting tribal consultation on this pilot program, and to request a consultation, you can email Ina Lupin, the case program manager, at the email listed on the slide. And the input we receive from the public comment period, workshops, and tribal consultation will be reviewed and used to develop a final draft of our grant guidelines for the council to adopt in October. In finalizing the guidelines, we will prioritize input from tribes and tribal serving organizations and welcome feedback on any recommended modifications to improve the program design or make it more accessible to tribes. Next. And that's the end. Sorry, I sped through everything looking at the time, but I will share the links in the chat and can open the floor for Angie to close us off. Thanks, Angie.
Nancy, you get the extra bonus cookie because that was really concise and you got us in right on the nick of time. So thank you. Okay, everybody, I want to say thank you for your time here, and thank you big time to all the state speakers who are working so hard to develop all these tools. There's money, there's tools, there's human help in the form of TA, there's input opportunities galore. There's a lot going on. Stick around after and we'll talk about it a little bit, but I'm kind of the data nerd on the team, so if you've got data stuff, please contact me directly. You can always reach out to Shasta as well. But we want to really thank you for your time. And now we'll start we'll let anybody go who has to, and we can just hang around and chat for a little while for whoever can hang around. All right, so we'll take a breath. We did it. We got through a lot of content. One thing I wanted to say about OPR, if anybody's still hanging around, and the tribes, anytime I do an adaptation plan, I'm always going to OPR data. I'm going to the climate assessment reports. There's such good information in there, and the work that they're doing is probably, it's up there with the federal government. It's leading the nation. We're very lucky to have access to all the information that they're compiling on our behalf. So it's a pep talk to look at those reports and use them as you can to help with your own decision making. And strategic growth councils, their programs and how much focus they're putting on tribes is really exceptional. So thank you for that. OPR as well. So any other questions, just raise your hand at this point or just unmute yourself and let's chat. Did you get, Shasta, did you see anything come up in the chat that you want to raise?
No, I think we managed to cover the questions, and just letting people know that we'll put it all together into a follow-up so that everybody has access to everything. And want to extend my appreciation to our speakers and our audience today for being here with us. And thank you, Kelsey. She says it was so great and super informative. So I really appreciate that. Bye, Patricia. I'm really glad to see some of my TIPO folks online as well. We know that these things come together, and it's important to be looking at it from both the environmental and the cultural lenses. So thank you for joining us. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see any hands. I don't see any questions. So I wonder if people are just feeling, overwhelmed, and they're like, I gotta run and get some more coffee before the next meeting. I'm actually giving another presentation at 11 o'clock myself, so I gotta be ready for that.
Lisa, I see you unmuted.
I'm just here on my phone, but yeah, happy to take any questions. I think Coral had to bounce, but I'm here as a support for SGC. Thanks.
Okay.
Can I ask Samu a quick question?
Yeah, Tina.
Thanks.
Tina.
Hi. Okay, so we're working on a sustainability dashboard, and one of the things that I had already thought about implementing was embedding one of your maps that you were showing on there. I know that we've been having a little bit of trouble. Do you know anything about that?
Is it a live web map? Or
Yeah,
can
we do it live? I guess, yeah, is the question.
Yes, I believe you could do it live. You might have to download the data from, so if we're talking about the Extreme Heat Edition, you can actually sign up. It's really easy to get an API key to download the data for your area. And then what you would do is just download that and make a map on ArcGIS Online or whatever your web mapping platform is. There's some good open source free ones, but I assume Paul
we're using, yeah, Esri's.
Okay. Yeah, and then you can add those heat layers, and you could even change the visualization of it if you wanted it to not be their color spaces and everything. So I'm happy to set up a meeting to do. I'm not an ArcGIS expert, but I have played around with downloading their data before, so I'm happy to help.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll look at it some more
Okay.
with our GIS folks, and if we can't figure it out, I'll reach out.
Yeah, please do. And if that way doesn't work to get the heat data from them, that is CalAdapt data, and they have also a way to download their data. So it's the same stuff. It's just different, way to get it.
All right,
Thank you for asking him that, Tina. Yes, because we've got some money from EPA where we're trying to put something up that's linked directly to the Paula website, so our community members can take a look and see what's going on with us, and also hopefully incentivize them if they see, oh well, I've got a neighbor with solar, or there's recycling data, and they want to be a part of improving those numbers for us. That's what we want to do. Trying to get into this digital GIS mapping world. But which scares me because I'm an old, but we'll get there. And I also wanted to mention that Paula and the San Pasqual Band are working with California Department of Public Health on some heat-related initiatives that we're going to be developing some guidance documents specifically for tribes to assess heat impacts and prepare for them in their communities. And so thank you to CDPH for that money. And we're hoping, I think San Pasqual is going to do some public events on that. And we're going to do some fun stuff like hopefully getting a giant thermometer and attaching it to a car that's going to be left out in the summer heat so you can see how hot it gets inside the car. Maybe we'll put some eggs in there or something and see what happens to them. Or even we're gonna bet some of our community firefighters to sit in the car and see how long they can last.
I'm really excited about that too, Shasta. And I just wanted to plug this tribal capacity building pilot program for any tribes that are on and are like I'm seeing this comment from Amanda, and maybe you have funding from FEMA to update your hazard mitigation plan, or you're working on that. But if you're just like, where do we even start with all this? I think this tribal capacity building program is going to be a fantastic opportunity to just really have the capacity, have the staff, and get a little bit of funding to go get bigger amounts of funding and also have this very tailored support. So I was just hearing about it from them and was really impressed by all the careful consideration that's gone into that.
And Amanda, I encourage you to sign up to be a potential partner with us in that data gathering part of our next round of the Tribal Climate Health Project, especially since we don't get to work too much with tribes up on the Northwest coast where you are. And so I think it would be a really great opportunity. And, I know about the great work that you all are doing at Tolowa, and I would love to work with you and share with you some of the things we've done to try to get more community buy-in here in Paula. And I will say one thing in terms of the urgency is that if you can make things personal to people and not just abstract, that is something that gets them a little bit more interested. I'm kind of joking about the putting a firefighter in a hot car to see how long they last, but that's the kind of thing. We all know that a hot car is dangerous, but we don't necessarily know how dangerous air pollution can be for certain populations, or flooding, or even, I know in your area, erosion, sea level rise, that kind of a thing. And so if you make it personal for people and say, like, do you want this to happen to you, or you don't want this to happen to you? You don't want to be trapped by a flood or a wildfire. You don't want your kids to not be able to play outside because of poor air quality. You make it personal, and then they tend to buy into it a little bit more. And then if you have the data to back that up, it helps.
Let me collect your data for you. And a lot of that data, you'll get a big worksheet, but you'll also get a slide deck where we can pull in the visualizations that are actually pretty compelling for decision makers, where you're like, oh, this is the trend for heat related illness, or oh, this is how long dry days are expected to last, in a couple of decades. Seeing is believing in some cases, but the personalization thing is so true. And we also have a template survey that if you wanted to go ask your community what they're experiencing and what they're concerned about, what their perspectives are, it's a free, easy survey to copy and use. And that's one way to have your community talk to itself, right? Like, have the community share their concerns with your decision makers. I want to just make sure anybody who feels like they need to go, totally go. This was on the fly to stick around, but it's fun.
That includes me. I gotta go.
Yeah, totally.
I gotta jump on to the early part of my next meeting. So thank you again, everybody. We will be following up soon. And I think actually, since I'm the host, Angie, I'll make you the host so that you don't all end up getting hung up on when I
think we're gonna
leave.
wrap. I think
are we good?
Yeah, I think that's all. I think we did it. Thank you guys.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody, and hopefully we'll speak with you again soon.
Bye, folks.
Bye.